a judge of the district level. A district judge was not the chairman, but under the Amendment Act of 2025, a district judge or a judge of an equivalent rank is made the chairman of the Wakf tribunal. And there is a structured selection process and a fixed tenure to ensure stability and efficiency in dispute resolution. The next one is the next reform done through the Amendment Act of 2025 is giving representation to the non-Muslims in the Central Wakf Council, in the state Wakf boards. Though Wakf is a movable or immovable property for the benefit of Muslims, in the Central Wakf Council and in the state Wakf boards, even non-Muslims are given representation in these institutions. So this was again one criticism against the Amendment Act. But this was one suggested reform. And Wakf institutions mandatorily contribute to Wakf boards. This was reduced from 7 to 5%, allowing more funds for charity. So those institutions which are managing Wakf properties, they should contribute 5% to the state Wakf board. Earlier it was 7%, now that was reduced to 5%. As the contribution to the state Wakf was reduced, there will be more money which is available for religious and charitable purposes. And there was one more reform which was brought in through the Wakf Amendment Act of 2025. Wakf institutions earning over 1 lakh annually must undergo audit by state government auditors. Transparency. See, earlier there was a problem of the state Wakf boards declaring a full village as a Wakf property. This created a lot of problems in states like Tamil Nadu and also in Kerala. So such a power of the state Wakf board to declare an entire village as Wakf property, this was omitted under the Amendment Act of 2025. So this removes section 40 preventing Wakf boards from arbitrarily declaring properties as Wakf, avoiding misuse like declaring entire village as Wakf. So Faizan Mustafa, who was a constitutional expert and presently the Vice Chancellor of Chanakya National Law University, he has made the following as good features of the bill. So what is good and what is bad in the Wakf Amendment Act 2025? In that, let us see what is good according to Faizan Mustafa. So this man says, who can create a Wakf? Only the lawful owner is allowed to create Wakf under the Amendment Act of 2025. This is a good provision under the Amendment Act. See here. No person shall create a Wakf unless he is the lawful owner of the property and competent to transfer or dedicate such property. The next one, in the Central Wakf Council and in the state Wakf boards, I said Muslim women were given representation and even non-Muslims were also given representation. So Faizan Mustafa says that this is a good provision because if there is a diversity of representation in the Central Wakf Council and also the state Wakf boards, it will improve the efficiency of the working of these institutions. So the proposal to include women and Muslims from other marginalized Muslim communities and non-Muslims in the Wakf administration improves decision making. And then as I said, Wakf by user is omitted from the through the Amendment Act of 2025, which means if you want to give your property for religious or charitable purposes, from now onwards, it can be done only through documents. Without documentation, you cannot give it. That is called Wakf by user is deleted under the Amendment Act of 2025. All the existing Wakf by user are allowed to continue if it doesn't involve the government property. This was again appreciated by Faizan Mustafa because it will unnecessarily remove the litigation by not recognizing Wakf by user. So the Amendment Act of 2025 also says before the property can be given as Wakf for religious and charitable purposes, adequate provision for the women in that family, the orphans, children in that family shall be made. This is again a reform which was appreciated by Faizan Mustafa. Then I said in every state there is a board called State Wakf Board to manage the Wakf properties. So the chief executive officer of State Wakf Board shall be an officer of the higher rank. Here it says he should be at least of the level of joint secretary rank in the state government. Earlier it was deputy secretary. Now under the Amendment Act of 2025, only an officer of the rank of joint secretary is eligible to become the chief executive officer of the state Wakf board. This is an improvement. The composition of the Wakf tribunal is amended to consist of a district judge. Just I told you earlier, a judge even below the district judge can become the chairman of the Wakf tribunal. Now, a judge of the district cadre, a district judge or an equivalent rank can only become the chairman of the Wakf tribunal. This is again an improvement. And an officer of joint secretary rank shall be one of the members of the Wakf tribunal. And then if there is any dispute with respect to the property of Wakf, the matter goes to the Wakf tribunal. Earlier there was no time limit, but now the existing Amendment Act of 2025 puts a time limit. So the tribunal shall give its decisions within 6 months. If 6 months is not adequate for valid reasons, it can take another 6 months. That's again an improvement. As I said, even under the Amendment Act of 2013, the Wakf Act 1995 was amended in 2013. Even under that law, there was a representation to the Muslim women in the Central Wakf Council and also the State Wakf Board. This was continued under the Amendment Act of 2025. The Muslim women will be given representation in the Central Wakf Council and also the State Wakf Board. This is again an improvement. Then what is bad in the law? The first criticism against the Wakf Amendment Act of 2025 is only the Muslims are allowed to donate Wakf. But if you go by the practice, and if you go by the history, there were innumerable examples wherein the Hindu landlords have given Wakf for the Muslim community in their localities. There were several judgments given by several high courts in this country recognizing the non-Muslimans giving Wakf. But the Wakf Amendment Act 2025 very clearly says only Muslims practicing Islam for the last 5 years are alone eligible to give Wakf. Non-Muslims are not allowed to give Wakf. So this was a violation of the property rights of non-Muslims is the argument made by Faizan Mustafa. Because there is enough evidence that even the high courts in this country have recognized non-Muslims like the Hindu landlords giving Wakf for the Muslim community in their localities. But that was omitted by the existing Wakf Amendment Act 2025. This was one criticism. So these were the cases. Piratu Pedavenkata Subbarayudu versus Haji Slar Sahib 1930. The Madras High Court observed that it is common for Hindu landlords to give Wakfs to Muslims living in their area. There was one more judgment in 1940. In Arur Singh versus Badardin, the Lahore High Court upheld the right of a Hindu to dedicate his property for a Muslim cemetery. Even after India's independence in 1956, in one of the cases, Moitisha versus Abdul Ghaffar, the Nagpur High Court upheld the right of non-Muslims to create Wakfs in this particular case in 1956. Since Hindu endowment laws do not prevent non-Hindus from creating Hindu endowments. See the difference. So under the Hindu endowments, even non-Hindus are allowed to give Hindu endowments to the Hindus. But here, under the Wakf Amendment Act of 2025, non-Muslims are not allowed to give Wakf. So this is arbitrary and violates Article 14 is the argument of Faizan Mustafa. So even this 5-year restriction was considered to be not good. A Muslim who has been practicing Islam for the last 5 years is alone eligible to give Wakf. So Faizan Mustafa makes an argument, what is the logical basis for such a provision? That's again one of the criticisms. Wakf by user was even recognized by the Supreme Court in 2019 judgment. So again, if you take Chidambaram, the then finance minister under Congress government, he also criticized the Wakf Amendment Act 2025 for including the non-Muslimans in the Central Wakf Council and the state Wakf boards, because if you see the Hindu religious and charitable institutions, there non-Hindus are not given representation. If that is the case, why for managing the properties of Muslims, why shall there be representation to non-Muslims? This was severely criticized by P. Chidambaram. So that's it about what is bad in the Wakf Amendment Act 2025. That's it about the Wakf Amendment Act of 2025. I have seen what is Wakf, what are the various laws enacted from 1913 till today dealing with the management of Wakf property, what are the reforms which are attempted by the Wakf Amendment Act of 2025, in that what is good and what is bad. So that's it about Wakf Amendment Act of 2025. Thank you and all the best.